You're a fraud, Carter, and I'm going to prove it in front of every soldier on this base.
Yes.
Commander Jack Sullivan's
Consider it
roar
done.
cracked across the range as he hurled her rifle case into the dirt and stomped it flat with his boot. 200 men froze. Nobody had ever seen the legend lose control like this. He snatched the single bullet off the table and threw it at her feet. Pick it up, prove your impossible shot, or pack your bag and never say your name on my base again. But Emily Carter didn't flinch. She bent down, lifted the bullet with 2 steady fingers, and said 7 quiet words that drained the color from his face. Before we go any further, if you believe a person should be judged by what they do and not by what people whisper behind their back, take 1 second to subscribe and follow Emily's story all the way to the end. And tell me in the comments what city you are watching from right now so I can see just how far this story has traveled. The bullet sat on the metal table, and for 3 long seconds, nobody in the entire training group made a sound. Emily Carter did not raise her voice. She did not step closer. She simply said, "1 bullet. You pick the target. If I miss, I pack my bag tonight and you never have to hear my name again." Commander Jack Sullivan blinked. It was the first crack anyone had seen in the man all morning. He had walked onto that range with the confidence of someone who had broken tougher people than her, and he had expected the same thing he always got. He expected her to argue. He expected her to defend herself, to list her medals, to talk about the operation everyone whispered about, the one where her whole unit almost died in the mountains. He expected her to get emotional because in his experience, people who could not back up their reputation always got emotional. Instead, she had given him a bullet and a bet. "You think this is a game," Sullivan said, but even he could hear that his voice had lost some of its edge. "No, sir," Emily answered. "I think you already made up your mind about me before I ever set foot on this base. I'm just trying to give you a reason to change it." A young soldier near the back of the group let out a low breath, the kind a man makes when he watches somebody do something brave and stupid at the same time. Sullivan heard it. He turned his head just enough to remind everyone that he was still in charge, that this was still his range, his evaluation, his rules. "Nobody touches that bullet," he said. "Nobody sets up anything. This evaluation runs the way I planned it, and it runs today. Not on some cheap dare." He walked away. He walked away because he needed to walk away, because for the first time in a very long time, Jack Sullivan did not know exactly what would happen next. And men like him hated that feeling more than they hated anything else in the world. Emily picked the bullet back up. She slid it into her pocket, and she waited. You have to understand who these 2 people were, because this story does not work if you only see one of them. Jack Sullivan had spent 22 years in the Navy. He had trained SEAL candidates who went on to do things this country will never officially admit happened. He had buried 11 friends. He had carried 2 of them out on his own back. And somewhere along the way, he had built a rule for himself, a rule he believed had kept him and his men alive. The rule was simple. Skill is proven. Skill is never assumed. The moment you start believing a man is good because of what people say about him, you have already signed a death warrant, and it might be your own. So when the paperwork came through about a transferred Army captain with a classified record and a nickname, the higher-ups refused to explain. Sullivan did not feel curious. He felt insulted. "They're sending me a ghost story," he had told Admiral Reynolds the week before in a conversation nobody outside that office ever heard. "A woman with a sealed file and a reputation nobody will confirm, and I'm supposed to just fold her into my program and act like that's normal." "You're supposed to evaluate her," Reynolds had said. "Same as anyone." "Same as anyone," Sullivan repeated. "Then let me evaluate her same as anyone. Let me push her the way I push everyone. And if she breaks, I don't want to hear one word about her feelings, her file, or her ghost story." The Admiral had been quiet for a moment. Then he said something Sullivan did not fully understand until much later. He said, "Jack, I'm not worried about you breaking her. I'm worried about what happens to you when you can't." Sullivan had laughed at that. He was not laughing now. Emily Carter, on the other hand, had learned a very different lesson from her years in uniform. She had learned that the loudest room is usually the emptiest one. She had learned that the people who talk the most about courage are almost never the ones who have needed it. And she had learned on one specific night in the mountains, a night she did not talk about, that the difference between the living and the dead is often nothing more than who kept their head when everything fell apart. She did not come to Fort Redstone to prove she was the best shot in the country. She came because a man named Marcus Hale had asked her to, And because Marcus Hale was one of maybe 3 people alive, she would not say no to. But she did not know that yet, not that morning. That morning, all she knew was that a Navy SEAL instructor had decided she was a fraud, and he had decided it in front of everyone. The evaluation Sullivan designed was not fair, and he knew it was not fair, and that was the point. Carter, he called out, walking back with a rifle case in his hand. You're up first. Everybody else, you watch and you learn. He set the case down and opened it, and a few of the soldiers actually leaned forward because they recognized the weapon inside. It was a precision rifle, the kind that took experts weeks to truly understand, the kind that needed careful adjustment for every shooter, every distance, every condition. And it was not adjusted for her. He had made sure of that. This isn't your weapon, Sullivan said. You've never fired this one. You don't get time to zero it. You don't get a warm-up. You get what a soldier gets on a bad day in a bad place, which is a tool you don't fully trust in a job that still needs doing. He crossed his arms. You still want that bet from earlier, because this is the version of it that actually matters. A murmur went through the group. It was not a fair test. Everyone standing there could feel it. And a couple of them, the younger ones, felt something turn in their stomach, because there is a particular kind of anger you feel when you watch someone powerful decide to make an example out of someone. Emily looked at the rifle. She did not touch it yet. How far? She asked. Far enough, Sullivan said. That's not a number, sir. 600 meters, he said. Give or take the wind, which I promise you is not going to cooperate. She nodded slowly, like she was filing the information away rather than reacting to it. And if I make the shot, Sullivan smiled without any warmth in it at all. Then you made one shot. That's all it'll be. One shot doesn't erase a file full of questions. There it was. Emily understood him now fully. This was not a test she could pass. He had built it so that failure meant she was a fraud, and success meant she was lucky. There was no outcome he had left open where she could actually win. Most people in that situation get angry. They argue. They point out how unfair it is. And that reaction, that completely human and reasonable reaction, is exactly what he was waiting for, because the moment you argue about fairness, you look like someone making excuses in advance. Emily did not give it to him. She picked up the rifle. Then I guess I'd better make it a good one, she said. What happened over the next 4 minutes, several of the soldiers on that range would talk about for years. She did not rush. That was the first thing people noticed. Under that kind of pressure with a weapon she had never held, most shooters get fast because their nerves make them fast. Emily got slow. She got slow in the way that only comes from a person who has been in situations so much worse than this one that a difficult shot on a training range barely registers. She ran her hands over the rifle. She learned it. She felt the weight of it, tested the resistance of the trigger without firing, checked the way it sat against her shoulder. She was reading the weapon the way you would read the face of a stranger you had to trust with your life in the next 60 seconds. She's stalling, someone whispered. She's not stalling, an older sergeant whispered back. Look at her hands, she's talking to it. Sullivan watched, and something uncomfortable started to move in the back of his mind, because he had seen this before. He had seen it in the very best people he had ever trained. That calm was not an act. You cannot fake that kind of calm. You either have walked through fire and come out the other side, or you have not. Emily lay down. She settled the rifle. She looked through the scope at a target 600 meters away that she had never zeroed a weapon for. And then she waited. She waited so long that Sullivan almost said something. She waited for the wind. She was reading the flags, the dust, the feel of the air on the back of her own neck. She was doing math in her head that she never wrote down, adjusting for a weapon she was guessing at in conditions designed to beat her. Any day now, Captain, Sullivan said. She did not answer him. She did not even seem to hear him. And then the wind shifted just for a moment into the pocket she had been waiting for. She fired. The sound cracked across the range, and every single person on that line held their breath and stared downrange at a target they could barely see. The spotter beside Sullivan looked through his optic. His mouth opened. He looked again. Sir, he said quietly. Say it, Sullivan said. That's a hit. Center. On a cold bore, no zero first round. The spotter lowered his optic and looked at his commander with an expression somewhere between disbelief and awe. Sir, I don't know how she did that. The range was silent again, but it was a different kind of silence this time. Earlier, the silence had been the silence of people watching someone get humiliated. Now it was the silence of people realizing they might have been on the wrong side of something. Emily stood up. She handed the rifle back to Sullivan calmly, respectfully, the way you would hand back anything that belonged to another person. "Thank you for the weapon, sir," she said. "It's a good rifle. Whoever set it up before knew what they were doing." And she walked back to her place in the line. Now here is what most people would expect to happen next. They would expect Sullivan to be impressed. They would expect him to admit he was wrong, to shake her hand, to feel that satisfying moment where the doubter becomes a believer. That is not what happened. And the fact that it did not happen is the whole reason this story is worth telling. Because Jack Sullivan did not become a believer that day. He became something more dangerous. He became a man who had just watched his own certainty crack and who was absolutely determined not to admit it. "Good shot," he said. 2 words, flat. "Doesn't answer my question, though." A ripple went through the soldiers. Even the ones who had been on his side felt it. There is a line, and everyone on that range knew he had just walked right up to it. "Sir," Emily said. "I asked whether you're the real thing or a rumor," Sullivan said. "One good shot on a good day doesn't tell me that. Any shooter gets lucky once. The question is, what happens when it's not a good day, when it's not a range, when it's not 600 meters at a paper target, and there's no spotter telling everybody how impressive you are?" He stepped closer to her. "I've buried men who could shoot better than you. Shooting was never their problem. Their problem was the moment everything went wrong and they froze. So no, Captain, one shot doesn't answer my question." And here's the thing about that moment. He was not entirely wrong. That is what made him so hard to hate and so hard to argue with. Underneath the pride and the cruelty, there was a real truth buried in what he said, a truth Emily herself believed more deeply than he could possibly know. She had watched better shooters than her freeze. She had watched a man who could put a round through a coin at 400 meters, lock up completely, when the shooting started for real on that night in the mountains, the night she did not talk about. So when Sullivan said that, something crossed Emily's face that nobody expected. It was not anger, it was recognition. "You're right," she said quietly. Sullivan stopped. "What?" "You're right," she said again. "One shot doesn't prove anything. Skill on a range doesn't mean a person can do the job when it counts." "I know that better than you think I do, sir." She held his gaze. "So ask yourself something. If you already know that one shot doesn't answer your question, why did you build a test that was only about one shot? You could have heard a pin drop." Because she had just done something nobody does to a man like Jack Sullivan. She had agreed with him, and in agreeing with him, she had turned his own words around and pointed them right back at his chest. Sullivan opened his mouth. Nothing came out. And in that half second of silence in front of 200 soldiers, everyone watching understood that something had shifted and that it had shifted against him. He recovered. Men like him always recover, at least on the outside. "Dismissed," he said to everyone sharply. "We're done for the day." He turned and walked off the range, and this time he did not look back. And this time, everyone knew exactly why. That evening in the small room they had assigned her, Emily sat on the edge of the bed and did not turn on the light. She was not upset about Sullivan. Sullivan, she understood. She had met 100 Jack Sullivans in her life, men who had earned their pride through real suffering and then let that pride grow into a wall so thick that nothing new could ever get through. She did not hate him. If anything, she felt something close to sympathy because she knew where men like that usually ended up. Alone and certain and wrong, what she was thinking about was the mountains. She had not chosen to think about them. Nobody chooses that. It comes on its own in the quiet when there is nothing left to do but remember. She thought about the cold. She thought about the sound the wind made up there. She thought about a young corporal named Danny who had looked at her with complete trust right before everything went wrong and who had asked her in a voice she still heard sometimes, "We're going to be okay, right, Captain?" She had told him yes. She was not sure to this day whether that had been a lie or a promise. She only knew that most of them had not been okay, and that she had spent every day since trying to understand why she was still here when better people were not. That was the reputation. That was the ghost story. That was the thing Sullivan sneered at without knowing a single true detail of it. He thought her legend was about a shot. It was never about a shot. It was about the fact that she had gotten some of them out, not all, some, and that the difference between all and some was a weight she would carry until the day she died. There was a knock at the door. She did not turn on the light. It's open. A soldier stepped in, one of the younger ones from the range, a specialist who could not have been more than 23. He stood there awkwardly, the way young men stand when they have decided to do something a little braver than they are used to. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm sorry to bother you." "You're not bothering me. What's your name?" "Specialist Reyes, ma'am." "What can I do for you, Specialist Reyes?" He hesitated. Then it came out in a rush. "I just wanted to say that what happened today wasn't right. The way the commander talked to you. That test wasn't fair, and everybody knew it, and I know it's not my place, but I wanted somebody to say it out loud. So, that's it. That's all I came to say." Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Sit down, Reyes." He sat carefully, like the chair might be a trap. "Can I tell you something?" she said. "And I need you to actually hear it, not just agree with me because you're mad on my behalf." "Yes, ma'am." "The commander wasn't right about me," she said, "but he wasn't entirely wrong about the thing he was afraid of. There really are people who look perfect on a range and fall apart when it's real. I've seen it. I've stood next to it. And a leader who ignores that, who just trusts a reputation, gets people killed." She let that sit. "So here's the part I want you to hear. Being angry at him is easy. Understanding him is hard. And you're going to be a much better soldier if you learn to do the hard one." Reyes stared at her. "You're defending him after what he did to you." "I'm not defending what he did," Emily said. "I'm telling you not to become the thing you hate. He judged me without knowing me. If you decide he's a monster without knowing him, you just did the exact same thing, only in the other direction." She smiled slightly in the dark. "The world's full of people who think they're the good guy because they picked the right villain. Don't be one of them." Reyes did not have an answer for that. He was young. It would take him a while to understand what she meant. But he would understand it eventually, and when he did, he would remember this exact conversation in this dark room with a woman who had every reason to be bitter, and somehow was not. "Can I ask you something, ma'am?" he said. "The shot today. The cold bore, no zero. How did you do that, honestly?" Emily thought about it. "You really want the honest answer?" "Yes, ma'am." "I didn't trust the rifle," she said. "So I stopped trying to. I stopped thinking about the weapon and started thinking about the wind, because the wind was the only thing I could actually read. Everybody was watching the rifle. Everybody was watching me. Nobody was watching the wind except me." She shrugged. "Most of the time, the answer to an impossible problem is just paying attention to the one thing everybody else is ignoring." Reyes left a few minutes later, and he left different than he came in, though he would not have been able to explain how. Emily sat back down in the dark, and she thought not for the first time that she had not come to Fort Redstone to shoot. She had come here for a reason nobody on that range understood yet, and she suspected that when they finally did understand it, everything about that day, including Jack Sullivan's cruelty, was going to look very different. Across the base, in a very different kind of room, Jack Sullivan was not sleeping either. He was sitting at his desk with a file in front of him, and the file was mostly blank. That was what bothered him. Whole sections were redacted, dates blacked out, locations removed. A summary that said almost nothing signed off by people whose names he recognized and respected, which was the part that gnawed at him the most. Because here was the truth Jack Sullivan did not want to face. He had walked onto that range believing she was a fraud, and she had put a round dead center on a cold bore with a rifle she had never fired. And every instinct he had built over 22 years, every instinct that had kept him and his people alive, was telling him that you do not do what she did by accident. You do not fake that. That calm, that focus, the way she read the wind. He had seen it maybe 5 times in his entire career, and every single time it had been in someone who had survived something that should have killed them. There was a knock at his door too, but this one did not wait for permission. Admiral Thomas Reynolds walked in, and one look at his face told Sullivan this was not a social visit. "Sit down, Jack," Reynolds said. "I am sitting, sir." "Then keep sitting, because I'm about to tell you something, and I need you to not do the thing you always do, which is decide you already know it." Reynolds pulled up a chair. "You put on a show today. Word travels fast on a base this size. You humiliated an officer in front of 200 people, and then when she proved you wrong, you moved the goalposts so you wouldn't have to admit it." "I evaluated her," Sullivan said. "Same as anyone." "No," Reynolds said. "You tried to break her, same as anyone. There's a difference, and you know there's a difference. And the fact that you're pretending you don't tells me you already feel bad about it. Sullivan's jaw tightened. With respect, sir, that file on my desk is useless. Half of it's blacked out. You send me a soldier, and you won't tell me what she's actually done. What am I supposed to do with that? Reynolds was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, "You're supposed to trust that some of us know things you don't. But you've never been good at that, have you, Jack? Trusting that somebody else might know something you don't." That landed harder than either of them expected. "You want to know why her file is blacked out?" Reynolds continued. "It's blacked out because if the details of what happened in those mountains ever became public, it would end careers a lot higher up than yours or mine. And she has never, not once, tried to use that to her advantage. She's never leaked it. She's never leaned on it. She sat there today and let you call her a rumor to her face, and she could have destroyed you with 3 sentences about who she actually is, and she chose not to." Reynolds stood up. "Think about that kind of person, Jack. Think about the kind of discipline it takes to be that person. And then ask yourself if that's really someone who needs you to test whether she can handle pressure." He walked to the door, then he stopped. "There's a meeting tomorrow," he said. "You're not invited to it, but I'm going to tell you it's happening anyway because I want you to understand what you almost stepped on today. Marcus Hale is coming to this base tomorrow to see her." Sullivan looked up sharply. "Marcus Hale?" "That's right, the Marcus Hale." "How many do you know?" Reynolds said. "He's coming out of retirement off his own land, driving here himself because of that woman you called a rumor today. Marcus Hale doesn't get out of his chair for rumors, Jack. You of all people should know that." And then he was gone, and Jack Sullivan sat alone with a nearly blank file and a feeling he had not felt in a very long time. It took him a while to name it because he was so out of practice. It was doubt, not doubt about her. Doubt about himself. The name Marcus Hale meant something to every serious operator in the country, and it meant something specific to Jack Sullivan. When Sullivan had been a young man, brand new arrogant, in the way only the truly untested can be, Marcus Hale had been the standard. Not a legend in the loud way. Hale hated that word. He was a legend in the quiet way, the way where nobody talked about the things he had done, because most of them were still classified, but everybody who knew. And here was the thing that ate at Sullivan as he sat there. Marcus Hale had a reputation for exactly one thing above all others. He did not care about the best shooters. He was famous among the people who knew him for saying that he had watched brilliant marksmen die and average marksmen live, and that the difference was never the shooting. The difference was the mind. Sullivan had heard Hale say almost those exact words decades ago, at a distance when Sullivan was too green to understand them. "We don't need better shooters," Hale used to say. "We need better thinkers with a rifle in their hands." And today on that range, a woman Sullivan had called a rumor had turned to him and said in front of everyone that one shot proves nothing because skill on a range is not the same as judgment under fire. She had said Marcus Hale's philosophy back to him. She had said it without knowing Sullivan had ever heard it. She had said it because she believed it in her bones the same way Hale did. And Sullivan had been too busy protecting his pride to hear it. He put his head in his hands. 22 years. 22 years of telling himself that his hardness was wisdom, that his refusal to trust was what kept people alive. And in one afternoon, a transferred captain had made him wonder whether somewhere along the line his caution had curdled into something else, whether the thing he called standards had quietly become fear. Fear of being wrong, fear of trusting the wrong person, fear that if he ever let his guard down, he would lose someone again, the way he had lost 11 friends already. He did not sleep that night. He sat at that desk until the sky started to go gray, staring at a file that told him nothing, thinking about a woman who had handed him a bullet and a bet, and about an old warrior who was driving across the country to see her, and about the very uncomfortable possibility that everyone in this story understood something he did not. Emily woke before dawn the way she always did, the way she had not been able to stop doing since the mountains. She did not know Marcus was coming. Nobody had told her yet. She only knew that she had a strange prickling feeling, the kind she had learned never to ignore, that something was about to change. She went for a run in the dark alone around the perimeter, and she let her mind go quiet the way it only could when her body was busy. And in that quiet, a memory surfaced that she usually kept locked away. It was Danny again, the corporal, the one who had asked if they were going to be okay. But this time the memory went further than she usually let it. This time she remembered what happened after she told him yes. She remembered the moment it all went wrong. She remembered the sound. She remembered three of her people freezing completely the way Sullivan had described the way she had told Reyes was real. Good soldiers, trained soldiers, men who could shoot better than her on any range in the country. And when it stopped being a range and started being real, they locked up because nobody had ever taught them what to do with the fear. And she remembered the one thing she had done differently. She had not been braver than them. That was the part people never understood about her, the part the rumors got completely wrong. She had not felt less fear. She had felt exactly as much fear as everyone else. She had just been taught by someone long ago that fear was information, not a command, that you could be terrified and still think, that the terror did not have to be the thing driving the car. Someone had taught her that, and as she ran through the dark, she thought about who had taught her that, and her chest tightened because she had not seen that person in almost 3 years, and she missed him more than she let herself feel most days. She stopped running. She stood there in the dark, breathing hard, and she said his name out loud to no one. Marcus. She did not know he was already on the road. She did not know that in a matter of hours she would turn around and see him standing there, older, slower, but with the same eyes. She only knew in that moment that whatever had brought her to this base, it was bigger than Jack Sullivan, and his pride bigger than one shot, bigger than proving anything to anyone. Something was coming. She could feel it the way she used to feel the wind change on that range. She just did not yet know that it would ask everything of her. By the time the sun came up over Fort Redstone, the story of the previous day had traveled through every barracks on the base. Some told it as a story about a cruel commander who got put in his place. Some told it as a story about a mysterious woman who could do impossible things with a rifle. But the soldiers who had actually been there, the ones who had stood on that line and watched it happen, told it differently. They told it as a story of a woman who had been handed the most unfair test they had ever seen, who had passed it, and who had then refused to gloat about it, and who had instead turned around and defended the very man who had tried to humiliate her. That was the part that stuck with them, not the shot, the mercy, because anybody they figured could be angry after being treated like that. Anybody could throw the truth in Sullivan's face. What Emily had done was harder. She had understood him. And in understanding him, she had shown every young soldier on that range a kind of strength they had never seen modeled before, a strength that had nothing to do with a weapon. Specialist Reyes, who had barely slept himself, found 3 other soldiers at breakfast talking about it, and he sat down and told them what she had said to him in the dark. He told them what she said about not becoming the thing you hate. He told them what she said about watching the wind everybody else ignored. And one of the older sergeants at the table, a man who had been in longer than any of them, put down his coffee and said something Reyes never forgot. "You know who talks like that," the sergeant said. "You know who says fear is information and not a command. I only ever knew one man who talked like that. And they retired him with more classified commendations than anybody I ever served with." He shook his head slowly. If she learned to think like that, she didn't learn it in any school. She learned it from him. And if she learned it from him, then whatever Sullivan thinks he knows about that woman, he doesn't know the half of it. "From who, Sergeant?" Reyes asked. "Learned it from who?" The sergeant looked at him, and before he could answer, the door at the end of the mess hall opened, and a runner came in out of breath, looking for an officer, any officer with a message that was about to turn the whole base upside down. "Marcus Hale is at the front gate," the runner said. "He's asking for Captain Carter, by name." And every soldier in that mess hall who understood what that name meant went completely still, because they knew in that instant that the woman Jack Sullivan had called a rumor the day before was about to be revealed as something none of them had imagined. The sergeant looked back at Reyes. He did not need to answer the question anymore. The answer had just walked through the front gate of Fort Redstone. Emily was still out near the perimeter when they came to find her. She saw the vehicle before she saw the man, and then she saw the man standing beside it, one hand resting on the hood because his knees were not what they used to be, and she stopped walking, and for a moment the disciplined, controlled captain that everyone had watched the day before simply disappeared, and what was left was just a person seeing someone she loved. "You could have called," she said, and her voice was not quite steady. "I could have," Marcus Hale said, "but some things you say to a person's face, or you don't say them at all." She crossed the distance between them. She did not salute. She did not stand at attention. She stopped in front of the man who had taught her that fear was information, the man whose words she had spoken back to a Navy SEAL commander without ever revealing where they came from. And she looked at him, and everything she had been carrying since the mountains rose up in her chest all at once. "I've been having a hard time," she said quietly. It was the first time she had said it out loud to anyone. "Since it happened, I keep thinking I should have gotten more of them out. I keep hearing Danny ask me if we were going to be okay." Marcus looked at her for a long moment. "I know," he said. "That's why I came. Not for the base, not for the admiral, for you." He straightened up slowly, painfully, and his eyes were kind and hard, at the same time in the way only a certain kind of old warrior's eyes can be. "Now walk with me, because I've got something to tell you, and it's going to be the hardest thing anyone's asked of you since that night. And I need you to say yes." And behind them, watching from a distance, he had told himself was respectful, but was really just cowardly. Jack Sullivan stood at the edge of the range and finally understood with a sick and humbling certainty exactly how wrong he had been. He had called her a rumor, and Marcus Hale had crossed the country for her. Whatever came next, Sullivan knew one thing for sure. He had a great deal to answer for. And the strangest part, the part he could not yet make sense of, was that the woman he had wronged was probably going to be the one to give him the chance to make it right. They walked in silence for almost a full minute before Marcus Hale said anything, and Emily let him take his time because she had learned long ago that the old man never wasted a word. "Do you remember the first thing I ever told you?" he finally asked. "You told me I flinched," Emily said. "You told me I had good hands and a bad heart, and that one of those was fixable." Marcus almost smiled. "And which one did I say was fixable?" "You never told me," she said. "You said I'd figure it out when it counted." He nodded slowly, and the two of them kept walking away from the vehicle, away from the base, out toward the quiet edge where nobody could hear them. And behind them, still standing, frozen at the edge of the range, Jack Sullivan watched the legend. And the woman he had humiliated walked shoulder to shoulder, like they had known each other their whole lives, and something in his chest twisted so hard he had to look away. "There's a reason I came, Emily," Marcus said. "And it's not to make you feel better about the mountains, though God knows I'd give the rest of my years to be able to do that." "Then why?" He stopped walking. He turned to face her, and the kindness in his eyes was still there, but underneath it there was something heavier now, something she had only seen in him a handful of times, and every single one of those times had come right before a decision that changed lives. "Because it's happening again," Marcus said. "What happened to you? What happened to your unit? It's about to happen to a lot more people, and the men in charge are doing the exact same thing they did before. They're training perfect shooters and sending them into places where perfect shooters die." Emily felt something cold slide down her spine. "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about a program," he said. "A real one, not a drill. There's a class of operators coming through in 6 weeks, and after that, a mission that I can't tell you the details of. And every instinct I have left is screaming that they're not ready. Not because they can't shoot, they can all shoot. They're ready the way your men were ready, which is to say they'll be perfect right up until the moment they need to be human, and then they'll freeze, and then they'll die." He paused. "Unless somebody who actually understands the difference gets in front of them first." "And you think that's me?" Emily said quietly. "I don't think it's you," Marcus said. "I know it's you, because you're the only person I ever trained who learned the lesson the hard way and lived. That's the only kind of teacher that works for this. You can't teach a man how to keep his head when everything falls apart if you've never watched everything fall apart yourself." His voice dropped. "You have. That's not a curse, Emily. As much as it feels like one, it's the only qualification that matters." She looked away from him. She looked out at the horizon, and for a long moment she didn't say anything at all. And Marcus, who knew her better than anyone alive, let the silence do its work. "I can't," she finally said. "Marcus, I can't stand in front of a room full of soldiers and teach them how to survive when I couldn't save my own people. Do you understand how that sounds? Do you understand what that would do to me?" "I understand exactly what it would do to you," he said. "It would force you to look at the thing you've been running from for 3 years. And you're right, it'll be the hardest thing you have ever done. Harder than the mountains." He stepped closer. "But you're already doing the hard version, Emily. You're just doing it alone in the dark at 3 in the morning with nobody to help you carry it. I'm offering you a version where it means something." Her jaw tightened. "That's not fair." "No," he agreed. "It is not. Nothing about this is fair. It wasn't fair when I lost my first team either. And that made her look at him because in all the years she had known him, Marcus Hale had never once mentioned losing a team. You didn't know that about me, did you? He said, reading her face. Nobody does. It's in a file that's more blacked out than yours. I lost 6 men in a single night long before you were ever born. And I spent the next 2 years the way you're spending yours right now. Certain it was my fault. Certain I should have died with them. He held her gaze. You want to know what got me out of it? What? A man exactly like me showed up at exactly the wrong moment, Marcus said, and asked me to teach the next generation how not to make my mistakes. And I told him no. I told him the same thing you just told me, that I couldn't teach survival when I'd failed to survive with my own men. He let out a breath. And he said something to me that I've carried for 40 years, and now I'm going to say it to you, and then I'm going to shut up and let you decide. Emily waited. He said the men who died don't need you to join them, Marcus said. They need you to make their deaths mean something. And the only way you do that is by making sure the next kid who asks, are we going to be okay, gets a leader who can actually make it true. Emily Carter, who had not cried once in 3 years, who had sat through funerals and debriefs, in endless nights with dry eyes and a locked jaw, felt something break loose in her chest at those words. She turned away so he wouldn't see it. But Marcus Hale had trained her, and he saw it anyway, and he had the grace not to say a word about it. How long do I have to decide? She asked when she could speak again. You already decided, Marcus said gently. You decided the second I said Danny's name. I'm just waiting for the rest of you to catch up. And he was right. He was always right. That was the maddening, wonderful thing about him. There's a problem, she said, wiping her face quickly and turning back around, already a soldier again, already thinking 3 moves ahead. The man running the range here, Sullivan. I know all about Sullivan. He thinks I'm a fraud, Marcus. He called me a rumor in front of 200 people yesterday. He kicked my rifle across the dirt. If I'm supposed to build a program on this base, I'm building it under a man who's already decided I don't deserve to be here. Marcus was quiet for a moment, and then to her complete surprise, he smiled. Not a small smile, a real one, the kind she hadn't seen on his face in years. Jack Sullivan, Utoem, he said slowly, like he was tasting the name. Now that is a name I did not expect to hear on this base. He shook his head. You want to know something, Emily? You want to know the real joke of all this? What? I know Jack Sullivan, Marcus said. I knew him when he was younger than that specialist who came to your room last night. I knew him when he was so arrogant, he made you look humble back before life beat it out of him. And the reason he is the way he is, the reason he built that wall so high, nothing can get through it, is because of the exact same thing that happened to you. He looked at her. Jack Sullivan lost people too. And he decided wrongly that the way to make sure it never happened again was to trust nobody and doubt everybody. He turned his grief into a fortress. You turned yours into a wound. His voice softened. 2 different people, same broken heart. Emily stared at him. You're saying he's like me. I'm saying he's what you could have become, Marcus said, if you'd made a slightly different choice. And I'm saying that if there's one person on this earth who can reach him, it's not going to be me, and it's certainly not going to be the Admiral. It's going to be the woman he just wronged in front of his whole base, because you're the only one who understands what's actually underneath all that armor. And that was the moment, though she didn't know it yet, that the entire shape of what was about to happen at Fort Redstone quietly locked into place. The meeting with Admiral Reynolds happened 2 hours later, and it was short, and it was decisive, and Sullivan was not in the room. Marcus laid it out. The program would be Emily's. She would have full authority over its design. She would select her own candidates from the incoming class, and she would train them her way without interference. And Reynolds would answer to anyone above him who had a problem with it. And Sullivan, Reynolds asked. Sullivan stays, Marcus said before Emily could answer. Both Reynolds and Emily looked at him. You want the man who called her a rumor to keep running his range next to her program? Reynolds said. Marcus, with respect, that's asking for a war. I'm asking for exactly the right war, Marcus said. Jack Sullivan is the best pure instructor on this base. Everyone knows it. His problem isn't skill, it's soul. And you don't fix a man's soul by transferring him somewhere he can keep being wrong in peace. You fix him by making him work every single day right next to living proof that he was wrong. He looked at Emily. That's if she'll have it. It's her program. If she wants him gone, he's gone. I'll back her either way. And there it was, the choice sitting right in front of her. She could end Jack Sullivan's career with a single word. Reynolds would do it. Marcus would support it. 200 soldiers had watched the man humiliate her, and not one of them would blink if she chose to bury him for it. It would be justice. It would be clean. And a part of her, a very human part, wanted it badly. She thought about Reyes sitting in her dark room asking her why she was defending the man who wronged her. She thought about what she told him. Don't become the thing you hate. The world's full of people who think they're the good guy because they picked the right villain. He stays, Emily said. Reynolds sat back in his chair. Marcus said nothing, but there was a look on his face that Emily would treasure for the rest of her life because it was pride, plain and simple. You're sure, Reynolds said. He stays, Emily repeated, but not on the sidelines. I don't want him watching me from a distance so he can keep telling himself I'm a fraud. I want him inside the program. I want him teaching alongside me. She leaned forward. If he's going to change his mind about me, it's not going to be because I proved something to him from across a range. It's going to be because he stood next to me while it got hard and saw it for himself. Reynolds looked at her for a long moment. Then he said very quietly, you know he's going to hate every second of it. I'm counting on it, Emily said. The way Jack Sullivan found out was the worst possible way, which was the way things always seemed to happen to him lately. He was in the equipment room alone when Reyes came to find him with the news, and Reyes, being young and honest and not yet wise enough to soften a blow, just said it straight out. Sir, they're saying Captain Carter's running a new program and you're assigned to it. Under her. Sullivan went completely still. Under her. That's what the roster says, sir. She's the lead. You're an instructor. Reyes hesitated. Sir, I don't think it was the Admiral's idea. I think it was hers. I think she picked you. And that was the part that hit Sullivan like a fist. Not that he'd been demoted. Not that the woman he'd called a rumor now outranked him inside her program. It was that she had chosen it. She had the power to end him. Everyone knew she did. And instead, she had reached down and pulled him up into the one place he least wanted to be, which was right next to her, where he'd have to face what he'd done every single day. He didn't understand it. That was what unsettled him most. In Jack Sullivan's world, you punished your enemies and rewarded your friends, and the whole thing made sense. But Emily Carter had just done something that didn't fit anywhere in that world, and it left him standing in that equipment room, feeling like the ground had shifted under his feet. Sir, Reyes said, are you okay? Get out, Reyes, Sullivan said, but there was no heat in it. He found her that evening out by the range alone, the way she always seemed to be. And for the first time since she'd arrived, Jack Sullivan approached Emily Carter, not as a judge, but as a man who had no idea what to say. You picked me, he said. No greeting, no rank, just that. I did. Why? Emily looked at him, and she could have said 100 things. She could have made him grovel. She could have listed everything he'd done and made him stand there and take it. She had earned that right, and they both knew it. Because you were right yesterday, she said instead. Sullivan blinked. What? You were right, she repeated. One shot doesn't prove anything. Skill on a range isn't the same as judgment under fire. You said it like it was an accusation, but it's the truest thing anyone said to me since I got here. And it happens to be the entire foundation of the program I'm about to build. She held his eyes. You already understand the problem, Commander. You've understood it for 22 years. You just decided I was part of the problem instead of part of the answer. I picked you because I'd rather have a man who understands the disease and got the patient wrong than a man who never understood the disease at all. Sullivan stared at her. He opened his mouth. Nothing came out. It was the second time in 2 days that it had happened to him, and it had not happened to him in a decade before that. I humiliated you, he said finally, in front of my whole base. I kicked your gear across the dirt. And you're standing here telling me I was right. You were right about the problem, Emily said. You were dead wrong about me. Both things can be true. Most of the important things are. She turned to go, then stopped. You want to make it right, Commander. Don't apologize. I don't need it, and it won't help either of us. Just show up tomorrow. Teach next to me, and keep your eyes open. That's all I'm asking. If I'm the fraud you think I am, you'll have a front row seat to watch me fail. And if I'm not, she let it hang, then maybe you'll learn something too. She walked away. And Jack Sullivan stood there in the fading light for a long, long time, a man who had spent his whole life being certain, suddenly certain of nothing at all. The program started 6 days later, and it started with a fight, not a physical one, a fight about everything. Because the moment Emily laid out how she wanted to train the candidates, Sullivan's entire 22 years of instinct rose up in revolt. "You're going to let them fail," he said, staring at her plan. "On purpose. You're going to design scenarios they can't win." "Yes." "That's insane. You break a man's confidence, you break the man. Everything I've ever learned says you build them up, you make them believe they're unstoppable, and then they act unstoppable. And then they meet a situation they can't beat," Emily said, "and they've never felt that feeling before, and it destroys them. Because you taught them they were unstoppable, and the universe just proved they weren't, and now they don't have a single tool for what to do next." She looked at him. "How many of your candidates froze in the field, Commander, over 22 years? Be honest." Sullivan's jaw worked. "Some." "How many were the ones who looked best in training?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. They both knew. "The ones who look best in training are the ones who've never been broken," Emily said quietly. "So the first time they break, it's for real, and there's no instructor there to catch them. I'm not going to break my candidates, Commander. Life is going to break them eventually no matter what I do. All I get to choose is whether it happens here where I can teach them what to do with it, or out there where it kills them." She let that sit. "You wanted to know if I was a fraud. Here's your answer. A fraud protects her students' feelings. A teacher protects their lives. Watch which one I do, and then decide what I am." And Sullivan, for the first time, felt the ground he'd been standing on for 2 decades tilt just a little bit more. The first day with the candidates was the day Jack Sullivan started to change, though he fought it every step of the way. There were 12 of them, handpicked the best shooters in the incoming class. Young men and one woman who could all do things with a rifle that most people couldn't dream of. And Emily put them through a scenario, and every single one of them failed it, and she'd built it so they would. Sullivan watched their faces as they realized they'd failed. He'd seen that look before. He'd caused that look before, and he'd always considered it a bad thing, a thing to be avoided. Confusion, frustration, the dawning horror of a person who has always been the best suddenly discovering they can lose. He waited for Emily to do what he would have done, which was either console them or push them harder. She did neither. She sat them down, and she said something he never would have said. "That felt terrible, didn't it?" she said. "That feeling in your chest right now, the heat behind your eyes, the voice telling you that you're not as good as you thought." She looked around at all of them. "I want you to remember exactly how that feels. Burn it into your memory. Because I promise you, on the worst day of your life, in the worst place you'll ever stand, that feeling is going to come back. And when it does, the difference between the ones who live and the ones who don't is going to be whether they've felt it before in a safe place or whether they're feeling it for the very first time with real bullets in the air." The candidates were silent. "I'm not here to make you feel unstoppable," Emily said. "Anybody can feel unstoppable when they're winning. I'm here to teach you who you are when you're losing, because that's the only version of you that's going to matter when it counts." And Jack Sullivan, standing at the back of the room, felt something he had not felt in 22 years of teaching. He felt like the student. The days that followed were hard, and they were hard on Emily too, in ways that only Marcus, watching from a distance, fully understood. Because every time she taught those candidates about fear, she was reliving her own. Every time she talked about the moment everything falls apart, she was back in the mountains. She'd built a program on the worst night of her life, and now she had to walk back through that night every single day in front of an audience and pretend it didn't cost her anything. It cost her everything. Marcus saw it. Sullivan slowly started to see it too. He saw it in the way she went quiet after certain scenarios. He saw it in the way her hands were sometimes not quite steady when a particular kind of exercise ended. He saw it most of all one evening when he came to find her about a scheduling issue and found her sitting alone in the dark equipment room, not crying, not falling apart, just sitting with the weight of something enormous pressing down on her shoulders. He almost left. It would have been the easy thing. Instead, he did something that surprised even himself. He sat down next to her. They didn't say anything for a while. "I lost 4 men, Sullivan finally said into the dark. He'd never said it out loud to anyone on this base. Years ago, different place, doesn't matter where, 4 of them. and every single one of them looked perfect in training. He stared at the wall. That's why I am the way I am. That's why I called you a rumor. Because the last time I trusted a reputation instead of testing it myself, 4 men who trusted me came home in boxes, and I've spent every day since making sure I never trust anything I haven't broken with my own hands first. Emily didn't look at him. She let him talk. She understood that this was costing him just as much as her exercises cost her. But watching you these past 2 weeks, Sullivan continued, and his voice was rough, I've started to think maybe I got it backwards. Maybe the reason I lost those men isn't that I trusted too much. Maybe it's that I built them up so high they never learned how to fall. He was quiet for a moment. Maybe if somebody like you had trained them, they'd still be alive. And maybe that's the thing I can't forgive. Not you, me. And there in the dark, 2 people who had turned the same grief into 2 different kinds of armor finally set the armor down just for a moment and saw each other clearly for the first time. I lost 11, Emily said quietly. It was more than she told anyone but Marcus. My whole unit almost. There was a corporal, Danny, 20 years old. He asked me if we were going to be okay, and I told him yes, and then most of them weren't. Her voice didn't break, but it came close. You want to know the real reason I'm hard to break, Commander? It's not discipline. It's not skill. It's that the worst thing that could ever happen to me already happened. There's nothing left on this earth that scares me the way that night did. That's not strength. That's just what's left when everything else burns away. Sullivan turned to look at her. You could have ended my career, he said, that first week. 1 word to the Admiral. Everyone was waiting for you to do it. I know. Why didn't you? Emily thought about it for a long moment. Because I've buried enough people who deserve to live, she said finally. I wasn't about to bury 1 more who deserved a second chance, even if he was too proud to know he needed one. And Jack Sullivan, the toughest instructor on the base, the man who had never once apologized to anyone for anything, put his head down and was silent for a very long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was so quiet she almost didn't hear it. I'm sorry, he said, for all of it. I know you are, Emily said, and I told you I don't need it, but I'm glad you said it anyway. Not for me, for you. She stood up. Now get some sleep, Commander. Tomorrow's the hard one. She was right. Tomorrow was the hard one, but not for the reason either of them expected. Because the next morning, everything changed, and it changed because of a phone call that came in before dawn, a call that Admiral Reynolds took alone in his office with the door shut, a call that made his face go gray. The mission had moved up, the one Marcus couldn't talk about, the one the candidates were supposedly being trained for. It wasn't 6 weeks away anymore. It was 2. And the candidates weren't ready. Not even close. 2 weeks into a program designed to take much longer, half of them were still learning to sit with their own failure. They had the beginning of what Emily was trying to give them, but only the beginning, and the beginning was not enough to keep men alive. Reynolds called Emily and Sullivan into his office at 6 in the morning and told them both at once. 2 weeks, Emily repeated. She'd gone very still. Sir, that's not enough time. You know that's not enough time. I told you the whole point of this is that it can't be rushed. The whole disease is people being rushed into things they're not ready for. I know what you told me, Reynolds said, and I fought it. I fought it all night, but it's not my call and it's not yours. The window moved. It moves or the whole thing's off, and if the whole thing's off, the reason it was happening in the first place doesn't go away. It just happens to somebody else, somewhere else with even less warning. He rubbed his face. So the question isn't whether we have enough time. We don't. The question is what you can do with the time we've got. Emily was silent, and Sullivan, watching her, saw something he'd never seen on her face before. He saw fear, real fear, not for herself, for them. There's a version of this, Sullivan said slowly, where we tell the Admiral no, where we say the candidates aren't ready and we won't sign off on sending them. It's within our rights. It's the responsible thing. And then they send somebody else's candidates, Emily said. Somebody who trained them the old way. Somebody who built them up to feel unstoppable and never taught them what to do when they break. She looked at him. You know what happens to those men, Commander? We both do. We've both buried them. The room went quiet. So we don't say no, Emily said. It wasn't a question. She'd already made the decision the way she always did, quietly and completely. We can't fix everything in 2 weeks, but maybe we don't have to fix everything. Maybe we just have to give them the one thing that matters most, the thing that would have saved my men if they'd had it. Which is what? Reynolds asked. Emily looked at both of them. A leader who's already been where they're going, she said, and who's coming with them. The silence in that office was total. No, Sullivan said immediately. Absolutely not. You're not going on that mission, Emily. You're a trainer. You're not cleared for that. You're not assigned to that. And after everything you've already survived, you are not walking back into hell just because, what Emily said, turning on him, just because the last time I led people into a place like that, most of them died. You think I don't know that? You think that's not the exact reason I have to go? Her voice was fierce now, fiercer than either of them had ever heard it. I've spent 3 years telling myself that if I'd been better, if I'd been calmer, if I'd taught them better, more of them would have come home. Well, here's 12 more kids about to walk into the same fire, and I can teach them everything I know in 2 weeks and pray it's enough, or I can go with them and make sure that when it falls apart, and it will fall apart, there's somebody standing next to them who already knows the way out. You could die, Sullivan said. Everybody dies, Emily said. The only question is whether it means anything. And those were Marcus's words, the words he'd said to her by the vehicle, and she didn't even realize she was repeating them until they were already out of her mouth. Reynolds looked between the two of them, and then he said the thing that neither of them was ready for. It's not going to be your call either, Captain, he said quietly, because there's something I haven't told you. Something in the mission briefing. He pulled a folder toward himself, and his hand was not quite steady. The location of the operation. The place these candidates are being sent. What about it? Emily said. Reynolds looked up at her, and there was something terrible and gentle in his eyes. It's the mountains, Emily, he said. The same range, the same operation area. They're sending these kids back into the exact place you lost your unit, because you're the only person alive who's been in there and made it out, and command wants that knowledge in the field one way or another. The room went absolutely silent. And Emily Carter, who had faced down a raging commander without flinching, who had made an impossible shot on a cold bore, who had walked back through the worst night of her life every single day for 2 weeks without breaking, felt every drop of color drain from her face. You knew, she said. Her voice was barely a whisper. This whole time, Marcus knew. You knew. That's why it had to be me. It was never just about the program. She was shaking now just slightly. You brought me here to send me back. No, Reynolds, said. I brought you here to train them. Sending you back is your choice, and only your choice, and I will fight anyone who tries to make it for you. But you deserve to know what you'd be choosing. He closed the folder. Those mountains took your people, Captain, and now they want to take 12 more. And the only person on this earth who knows how to bring them home is sitting in this room trying to decide if she can bear to walk back in. Jack Sullivan looked at Emily, and for the first time he understood the full weight of what she'd been carrying, and the full cruelty of what was being asked of her, and the full impossible courage it would take to say yes. Emily didn't say anything for a long time. She stood there in the gray early light with the two men watching her, and she went somewhere far away back to the cold and the wind, and a young corporal's voice asking if they were going to be okay. And then very quietly she spoke. When do we leave? She said. It wasn't a question about whether. She'd already decided. She'd decided the way she decided everything the moment she understood what was at stake, and no fear on earth was going to move her off it now. Emily, Sullivan started. When do we leave, sir? She said again to Reynolds, ignoring Sullivan completely. Her jaw set, her eyes wet and burning and absolutely certain. Reynolds looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, 2 weeks, if you say yes. I say yes, Emily said. And in that small office, before the sun had even fully come up over Fort Redstone, the woman Jack Sullivan had called a rumor 2 weeks earlier agreed to walk back into the place that had destroyed her to lead 12 young strangers through the fire that had taken everyone she loved, because she had decided somewhere deep in the ruins of that terrible night that their deaths would mean something, or her survival never would. Sullivan stared at her, and then quietly, in a voice that shook, he said the words that surprised everyone in the room, including himself. Then I'm coming too. Then I'm coming too. The words hung in the office, and for a second nobody moved. Emily turned to look at him, and Reynolds looked at him, and Jack Sullivan stood there having said the thing before he'd fully decided to say it, which was not like him at all. Commander Reynolds started, "You're not cleared for." "Then clear me," Sullivan said. "You cleared her. Clear me. I've got more field time than anyone on this base, and you know it. And I am not going to stand here on this base, safe, warm, and useless, while a woman I spent 2 weeks doubting walks back into the worst place on earth to save 12 kids I helped train." His jaw was tight. "I've spent 22 years telling candidates that leaders go first. Leaders don't send, they go. Well, here's the first time in a decade it's actually my turn to prove I meant it." Emily studied him, and she saw something in his face she hadn't seen before, something raw, and she understood it because she'd felt it herself. It was a man trying to buy back his own soul. "This isn't about redemption, Commander," she said quietly. "You don't get to come with us because you feel guilty about me. If your head's full of proving something to yourself, you're a liability, and I'll leave you on the tarmac myself." "It's not about you anymore," Sullivan said. "You were right about that too. It's about the 12 of them." He held her eyes. "I built half those kids into who they are. If they're going into that place, I'm going to be there when it gets hard. That's not guilt, Captain. That's the job I forgot I signed up for." Emily looked at him for a long moment. Then she nodded once. 2 weeks, she said. "You train with them. You bleed with them. You don't get to be the instructor watching from the back anymore. You're one of us now, or you're nothing to them out there. Understand?" Understood. And that was how 2 weeks before an operation that half the people in that room privately believed would kill them, the toughest instructor at Fort Redstone became a student in the program he'd nearly destroyed, and the woman he'd called a rumor became the only leader he'd trusted in 22 years. The candidates found out that same afternoon, and they found out the hard way, because Emily believed in telling people the truth even when the truth was terrible. She gathered the 12 of them, and she told them the timeline had moved. 2 weeks. She watched their faces as it landed, watched the confidence they'd been building crack right down the middle, and she let it crack because she'd rather they cracked here than out there. "Some of you are thinking you're not ready," she said. "You're right, you're not. Neither am I." That got their attention. A trainer wasn't supposed to say that. "I'm not going to lie to you," Emily continued. "I've never once lied to a soldier, and I'm not going to start with the 12 of you. 2 weeks is not enough. If we had 6 months, I'd feel good about this. We don't. So here's what I need you to understand, and I need you to actually understand it, not just nod." She looked at each of them. "The mission is real. The danger is real. And some of the things I'm about to teach you in the next 14 days, I learned by watching people die. That's not a story. That's not to scare you. That's just the truth of where this knowledge comes from." A young candidate near the front, a kid named Torres, who couldn't have been older than Danny had been, spoke up. His voice was steady, but his hands weren't. "Ma'am," he said, "are we going to be okay?" And the whole world stopped for Emily Carter. Because it was the exact question, the exact words, Danny's words coming out of a stranger's mouth 20 years old, and looking at her with the exact same trust that still haunted every night she couldn't sleep. She almost couldn't breathe. Sullivan, standing at the side, saw it hit her, saw her go pale, and he took half a step forward, ready to cover for her, ready to jump in. She stopped him with a small motion of her hand, because she'd been waiting 3 years for this question. She'd been rehearsing the answer for 3 years without knowing it. And she knew, standing in front of Torres, that everything, all of it, the whole reason Marcus had brought her here, the whole reason she'd said yes, came down to how she answered this one boy right now. "I'm not going to tell you yes," Emily said. Her voice was steady, even though nothing inside her was. "The last time somebody asked me that, I said yes, and I was wrong, and I've carried that wrong every day since." The room went dead silent. "So I'm not going to lie to you the way I wish somebody had never let me lie to him. I don't know if we're going to both okay, Torres. I can't promise you that. Nobody can promise you that, and be honest." Torres swallowed. The whole room had stopped breathing. "But here's what I can promise you," Emily said, and now her voice changed, got stronger, filled up with something that made every candidate sit up straighter. "I can promise you that I have been exactly where we're going. I can promise you I know the way in and I know the way out. And I can promise you that if it falls apart out there, and it might, I will be standing between you and the worst of it until every single one of you that can come home does. I can't promise you we'll all be okay, but I can promise you that you will not be alone, not for 1 second. That's the promise I can keep. and I will die keeping it before I break it. Torres stared at her, and something happened in that room, something Sullivan felt in his own chest, something he had spent 22 years trying and failing to create with his build-them-up methods. The 12 candidates didn't look confident. They looked something better than confident. They looked like they believed in the person leading them. That, Sullivan said quietly to himself from the side of the room, is the thing. That's the thing I never knew how to teach. And he finally understood all the way down why Marcus Hale had crossed the country for this woman. The 2 weeks that followed were the hardest of Jack Sullivan's life and the most important. He trained beside the candidates, not above them. He failed the scenarios right alongside them because Emily made the scenarios hard enough that even he failed. And the first time it happened, the 12 kids watched their legendary instructor eat the same defeat they'd been eating, and something shifted. He stopped being the god at the back of the room. He became one of them. And Emily had known that would happen. She'd counted on it. Because a leader who's willing to fail in front of his people is worth more than 10 who never let their people see them lose. But it cost Sullivan. Every failure scraped against 22 years of pride. And on the fourth night, he nearly quit. He found Emily in the equipment room again where she always seemed to end up, and he stood in the doorway and said, I don't know if I can do this. Do what? Be one of them, Sullivan said. Fail in front of them. Let them see me not have the answer. He shook his head. You don't understand. My whole life, my whole identity is being the man who has the answer. Being the one who's already been there, already knows, already can't be surprised. And you're asking me to stand in front of 12 kids and be surprised. Be wrong. Be human. His voice cracked slightly. I don't know who I am if I'm not the man with the answer. Emily was quiet for a moment, and then she said something that went straight through him. That's exactly why you froze, she said. He looked at her sharply. What? You're 4 men, she said gently. You told me they looked perfect in training and froze in the field, but you never asked yourself why you couldn't reach them in that moment, why you couldn't pull them out of it. She stood up, faced him. It's because you'd taught them without ever meaning to that a real soldier always has the answer. So when the moment came and they didn't have the answer, they thought that meant they'd failed. They thought the freezing was proof they were weak, and instead of moving through it, they drowned in the shame of it. She held his eyes. You didn't lose those men because you trusted too much, Commander. You lost them because you taught them that not knowing was the same as failing. And when they didn't know, they broke. Jack Sullivan stood in that doorway and felt 22 years of certainty collapse. You're telling me it's my fault, he said hoarsely. I'm telling you it's nobody's fault, Emily said. I'm telling you that you did the best you knew how with what you understood. Same as me. Same as everyone who's ever led people into danger and lost some of them. Her voice softened. But if you want to honor those 4 men, Commander, you don't do it by being the perfect instructor who never fails. You do it by walking into that room tomorrow and being wrong in front of those kids on purpose so they learn that being wrong isn't the end. So the next time one of them doesn't have the answer, they don't drown in it the way your men did. That's how you bring your 4 men home, not by joining them, by making sure it never happens to anyone else. And there it was again. Marcus's lesson. The men who died don't need you to join them. They need you to make their deaths mean something. She'd taken the thing Marcus gave her, and she was handing it to Sullivan now, passing it down the way it was meant to be passed down. Sullivan didn't say anything. He couldn't. He just stood there in the doorway with his eyes wet on a man who had never cried in front of anyone holding it together by a thread. Go to bed, Commander, Emily said gently. Tomorrow be wrong. It's the bravest thing you'll ever do. And it'll save more lives than every perfect answer you ever gave. The next morning, Jack Sullivan walked into the training room, ran a scenario, failed it badly, and instead of covering it up or explaining it away, he turned to the 12 candidates and said, I don't know what I did wrong. I'm going to figure it out with you. Watch me be confused because you're going to be confused out there, and I want you to see that confused isn't dead. Confused is just the moment before you figure it out. And the 12 candidates looked at their legendary instructor, admitting he didn't know something, and every single one of them relaxed a little, because if the great Jack Sullivan could be confused and survive it, so could they. Emily watched from the side, and she thought, this is working. God help me, this might actually work. She should have known better than to think it, because the universe had a way of punishing hope. The blow came on day 9, and it came in the form of Marcus Hale. He had stayed on base quietly watching, offering a word here and there. Emily had gotten used to seeing him at the edge of the range in the mornings, and it had become one of the few things that made the whole impossible situation bearable. Having him there, knowing he believed in her. On day 9, he wasn't at the range in the morning. She didn't think much of it at first. Old men slept in, but by mid-morning she had a feeling, that same prickling feeling she'd learned never to ignore, and she went to find him, and she found him in his quarters on the floor, conscious but gray, one hand pressed to his chest. Marcus. She was on her knees beside him instantly. Marcus, what happened? Talk to me. It's the heart, he said, and even now his voice was calm, maddeningly calm, the way it had always been. It's been the heart for a while, Emily. I didn't tell you because you had enough to carry. How long? She demanded, already reaching for help, already moving. How long have you known? Long enough to know I came here to do one last thing, Marcus said, and he caught her wrist with a grip that was weaker than it should have been, and that terrified her more than anything. Listen to me. Look at me. Stop trying to save me for 1 second and listen. Marcus, I came here to give you back to yourself, he said. That's the last thing I had left to do, and I've done it. Whatever happens to this old heart, I've done the thing I came to do. You're leading again. You're teaching again. You said yes to those mountains. You're already the person I always knew you were. His grip tightened. So you do not get to fall apart because of me. You hear me? You do not get to use me as one more reason to believe you can't save the people you love. I chose my life. I lived every year of it. This is not the mountains. This is not Danny. This is just an old man's heart finally getting tired. And you are not allowed to carry it. Say it. Marcus, please. Say it. You are not allowed to carry it. I'm not allowed to carry it, Emily whispered, tears streaming down her face. Good, Marcus said, and he smiled, that real smile, the one she'd waited years to see and now might be seeing for one of the last times. Now get me to the medics before I embarrass myself, and then get back to those kids because they need you more than I do, and I did not raise you to sit at bedsides when there's work to be done. They got him to the medics. He was alive. Stable, they said, but serious. He'd need surgery, real surgery, and it couldn't happen on base. And there was a real chance, the doctor said carefully, that a man his age with a heart that far gone might not come through it. And Emily Carter had to walk out of that medical bay 5 days before she was scheduled to lead 12 kids into the mountains that had destroyed her and go back to training with the man who'd saved her life lying behind her, possibly dying. Sullivan found her in the hallway. He'd heard. Everyone had heard. You should be with him, Sullivan said. He ordered me not to be, Emily said. Her voice was hollow. He said he didn't raise me to sit at bedsides. He said the kids need me more. She laughed, and it was a terrible sound. 20 years I've known that man, and even flat on his back with a failing heart, he's still the one taking care of me. He's still the one being strong, so I don't have to be. Her composure cracked just for a second, and Sullivan saw the whole enormous weight of it. I don't know if I can do this, Jack. I said yes to the mountains because he asked me. And now he might not even be here to see it. What if I go back in there and I fail again? What if I bring 12 more kids home in boxes? What if the last thing that man ever knows is that he was wrong about me? And Jack Sullivan, who 2 weeks ago had called this woman a rumor and kicked her rifle across the dirt, did the only thing he could think of. He took her by the shoulders and he said the things she'd said to him. He's not wrong about you, Sullivan said fiercely. I know that because I was wrong about you, and I've never been more wrong about anything in my life. You want to know what I see when I look at you? I see the only leader I've ever trusted in 22 years. I see the person who taught me how to be human at 50 years old when I thought it was too late. I see the woman those 12 kids would follow off a cliff because they believe in her that much. He gripped her tighter. Marcus isn't wrong about you, Emily, and the way you prove it isn't by being perfect. It's by walking into that room right now with your heart breaking and teaching those kids anyway. Because that's what he'd do. That's what he did his whole life. And it's what he raised you to do. Emily looked at him, and slowly something steadied in her. When did you get wise, Commander? She said, wiping her face. About 9 days ago, Sullivan said. A captain I know beat it into me. And she almost laughed, a real one this time, and it was enough. It was enough to get her down that hallway and back into that room where 12 young people were waiting for a leader not knowing that the one they had was holding herself together with nothing but a dying man's last order and the words of a man who used to be her enemy. The days blurred after that. Emily trained the candidates by day and sat with Marcus by night in defiance of his orders, because some orders a person has to disobey. He drifted in and out. Sometimes he was sharp and clear and full of advice about the mountains, about the terrain, about the specific ways men break in cold and altitude and fear. Sometimes he didn't know where he was. On one of the clear nights, he told her something she'd never known. "Danny," he said, "the corporal, the one who asked if you'd be okay." Emily went still. "How do you know about Danny? I never told you his name." "Because I read the file," Marcus said. "The real one, the one nobody else gets to read." His eyes were clear and steady in the dim light. "I know what happened up there, Emily, all of it. Not the story people whisper, the truth, and I need to tell you something about that night, because you've had it wrong for 3 years, and I'm not going into surgery with you still believing a lie." Emily's heart was pounding. "What are you talking about?" "You think you failed them," Marcus said. "You think if you'd been better, calmer, faster, more of them would have lived. That's the weight you carry." He shook his head slowly. "Emily, I read every second of that operation. The reason 11 of your people died is that command sent you into a situation that no one could have survived intact. It was a bad order from bad intelligence, and it was designed to fail before you ever set foot on that mountain." His voice was gentle but absolute. "You didn't lose 11 people because you weren't good enough. You saved the ones you saved because you were the best anyone could have possibly been. Anyone else, everyone dies. Everyone. The only reason there are survivors at all is you." Emily couldn't speak. 3 years. 3 years of certainty that it was her fault, that she should have done better, and Marcus was telling her with the authority of a man who'd read what no one else could read, that she'd had it backwards the whole time. Why she managed? Why didn't anyone tell me this before? "Because the order came from people who'd rather you blame yourself than blame them," Marcus said, and for the first time there was anger in his voice, cold and old and deep. "It's easier to let a hero carry the guilt than to admit the people up top sent her into a slaughter. So they buried the truth and they let you think it was you. And I have spent 3 years unable to reach you, unable to tell you, because I wasn't cleared until I called in every favor I had left on this earth to get the clearance to say these exact words to you before it's too late." His hand found hers. "It was never your fault, Emily. It was never your fault. Say it." And Emily Carter, who had carried the weight of 11 deaths for 3 years, who had let it define every night and every choice and every locked-away piece of her heart, finally broke all the way in front of the one man she trusted it enough to break in front of. "It wasn't my fault," she wept. "It wasn't your fault," Marcus said, holding her hand. "And now you go into those mountains knowing that. Not to punish yourself, not to earn back something you never lost. You go in as the best there is, doing the thing you were born to do, bringing kids home because you're good enough, not because you owe a debt." He smiled, fading now, tired. "That's my gift to you. That's the last thing I had. I gave you back yourself, and now I gave you back the truth. My work's done, kid. Whatever happens on that table tomorrow, my work is done." They took Marcus into surgery the next morning off base, and Emily was not allowed to go because in 2 days she was leading an operation and command would not risk her. She stood on the tarmac and watched the transport carrying him lift off, and she did not know if she would ever see him again, and she had to turn around, dry her face, and walk back to 12 young people who needed her whole. Sullivan was waiting. "Any word?" she asked. "Not yet. Long surgery. We won't know for hours." He paused. "How are you?" And Emily looked at him, and something had changed in her face, something he couldn't quite name at first. The grief was still there, but underneath it, for the first time since she'd arrived at Fort Redstone, the guilt was gone. Marcus had taken it with him into that surgery. It wasn't her fault. She finally believed it. And a person who has set down a 3-year wait walks differently even into hell. "I'm ready," Emily said quietly, and she meant it in a way she hadn't meant anything in 3 years. The last 48 hours before the operation moved fast. The candidates were as ready as 2 weeks could make them, which wasn't ready enough, but Emily had given them the one thing that mattered. They didn't believe they were unstoppable. They believed they knew what to do when they stopped. And that Sullivan finally understood was worth more than all the confidence in the world. The night before they shipped out, Emily gathered the 12 of them one last time, And Sullivan stood among them now, not above them, one of the team. Tomorrow we go to the mountains, Emily said. I've been to these mountains. They took people I loved, and I've spent 3 years believing that was my fault. She looked at them steadily. 2 nights ago I found out it wasn't, that the people I lost weren't lost because I wasn't good enough. And I'm telling you that not for me, but because I need you to understand something before we go. She paused. Out there, if it goes wrong, and it might, your brain is going to try to tell you it's your fault, that you should have been better. That's a lie. That's the lie that killed more good soldiers than any enemy ever did. The lie that says not being perfect means you failed. Her voice rang out. You will not be perfect out there. You will be scared and confused, and you will not always have the answer. And none of that means you failed. It means you're human in an impossible place doing your best. And your best trained the way I've trained you is enough. Do you hear me? It isn't enough. Torres, the kid, who'd asked if they'd be okay, looked at her. We hear you, ma'am, he said. Then get some sleep, Emily said. Tomorrow we go to do the impossible thing, and we come home, as many of us as the mountain allows, and we do it together, and nobody walks in there alone. They filed out, and when the room was empty except for her and Sullivan, he said quietly, you know they'd follow you anywhere now. I know, Emily said. That's what scares me. Because now, if I lose them, it really would be because they trusted me. No, Sullivan said. You've got it backwards again, Captain. If you lose them, it'll be because the mountain is the mountain. And if you save them, and I think you're going to save them, it'll be because they trusted you. You don't get the second thing without risking the first. That's leadership. You taught me that. He almost smiled. 9 days ago. Emily looked at him, and then she asked the question she'd been carrying since the tarmac. Any word on Marcus? Sullivan's face changed and her heart stopped. Emily, he said carefully, there's word. Tell me. And Sullivan opened his mouth to tell her whether the man who'd given her back her whole life had survived the table, whether Marcus Hale was still breathing on the eve of the operation he'd sent her to lead, and the whole weight of everything the mountains, the 12 kids, the man who'd crossed the country to save her, came down to the next words out of Jack Sullivan's mouth. He made it, Sullivan said. He's alive, Emily. The surgery worked. He's weak. He's got a long road, but he made it off that table, and the first thing he did when he woke up was ask a nurse to get a message to you. Emily grabbed the edge of the table to steady herself. What message? Sullivan pulled out a folded piece of paper, and his hand wasn't quite steady either. He dictated it. Nurse wrote it down. He handed it to her. I didn't read it. It's yours. Emily unfolded the paper, and in a nurse's careful handwriting were 7 words. Go bring them home. That's an order. She read it 3 times, and then she folded it and she pressed it against her chest for a moment, and when she looked up, her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set, and Sullivan saw the last piece of the woman lock into place. Marcus was alive. He was going to see this. Whatever happened in the mountains, he'd be on the other side of it waiting. Okay, Busai, Emily said quietly. Okay, then we go. They shipped out before dawn. The flight to the staging area was long and quiet, 12 young candidates and 2 instructors, and Emily watched them the whole way, watched who slept and who couldn't watched. Torres grip and regrip his gear. Watched the young woman named Parks stare out at nothing with the 1,000-yard stare of someone doing the math on their own mortality. She didn't tell them to relax. She'd never lied to them, and she wasn't going to start. Instead, an hour out, she said one thing. Everybody's scared right now, Emily said loud enough for all of them. Including me, including the commander. Sullivan nodded, and it landed because the great Jack Sullivan admitting fear was worth more than any speech. The fear you're feeling isn't a sign you're not ready. It's information. It's your body telling you this matters. Let it tell you that. Don't let it tell you what to do. She looked around. Fear is a passenger. It is not the driver. You are the driver. Everybody say it back to me. Fear is a passenger. 12 voices said. It is not the driver. Say it again. Fear is a passenger. It is not the driver. And Sullivan watched something settle over the 12 of them, and he remembered his 4 men, and he thought, if I'd known these words, if somebody had given me these words 22 years ago, and he had to look away. They reached the staging area, and the briefing was grim. The operation was a rescue. That was the part command had held back until now. A reconnaissance team, 7 people had gone into the same mountain range weeks ago and gone dark, and the last intelligence suggested some were still alive, pinned down waiting. The window Reynolds had talked about wasn't arbitrary. It was the last window those 7 people had. After that, the weather would close the mountains for the season, and anyone still up there would not come down. Emily listened to all of it with a stillness that Sullivan had come to recognize as the deepest kind of focus. "So it's a rescue in the same place I lost my unit," she said quietly when the briefing officer finished. "The same terrain, the same conditions, the same mountain that took 11 of my people." "Yes, Captain," the officer said. "Command believes your first-hand knowledge of that terrain is the difference between success and losing this team the way we lost." He stopped himself. "The way you lost mine," Emily finished for him. Her voice was flat. "You can say it. I've made my peace with it. It wasn't my fault. I know that now. But you can say it." The officer had the grace to look ashamed, and Sullivan, watching, felt a fresh wave of anger at the machine that had used this woman's grief and then handed her the guilt to carry and was now sending her back into the same meat grinder. But he said nothing because Emily had already accepted it, and this was her operation. "One question," Emily said. "The reconnaissance team. Who's leading it?" The officer checked his file. "A staff sergeant. Name of Reyes. Miguel Reyes." And Emily went cold because she knew that name, not the sergeant, but the name. And when the officer turned the photo around, her stomach dropped because looking back at her was an older, harder version of a face she'd seen just weeks ago in a dark room on base. "Reyes," she said slowly, "the specialist on base. Is he—" "His older brother, ma'am," the officer said. "The specialist requested to be told the moment we identified who we were going after. Seems he figured it out before we did. He's been trying to get himself assigned to this operation for 2 weeks. Command said no. He's not ready." Emily closed her eyes, because now it was personal in a way she hadn't asked for. The young specialist who'd come to her room, who'd told her the test wasn't fair, who she'd told not to become the thing he hated. His brother was up on that mountain dying, waiting for a rescue that might not come. And that kid was back on base right now, going out of his mind, forbidden from doing the one thing every fiber of him needed to do. "Get me a line to base," Emily said. "Ma'am, we're about to—" "Get me a line to base. 2 minutes. That's all I need." They got her the line, and on the other end, Specialist Reyes' voice came through tight and raw. "Ma'am, is it true? Is it my brother up there?" "It's true, Reyes." There was a sound on the other end, a young man trying not to break. "Ma'am, you have to let me come. That's my brother. I trained for this. I'm ready. I swear to God I'm ready. Please, you have to." "Reyes," Emily said gently, "listen to me. Are you listening?" A pause. "Yes, ma'am. You remember what you told me that first night, that the test Sullivan gave me wasn't fair?" "I remember." "You were right. It wasn't fair. And I'm about to tell you something else that isn't fair, and I need you to be the man I think you are when you hear it." Emily's voice was steady and kind. "You're not coming. Not because you're not good enough, because you're too close. If it were my brother up there, I wouldn't trust myself either, and neither would anyone who loved me. The thing that makes you want to run up that mountain is the exact thing that would get you killed on it." She let that land. "But here's what I need you to hear. I am going up there. Me. And I know that mountain better than anyone alive. And I am going to do everything a human being can do to bring your brother down. I can't promise you I will. I told you I don't lie to soldiers. But I can promise you I will not stop trying while there's breath in my body. Do you believe me?" A long, shaking pause. "I believe you, ma'am." "Then do the hardest thing there is," Emily said. "Stay, trust somebody else to carry it, and be there when we come back so your brother sees your face when he comes down that mountain. Can you do that for me?" "Yes, ma'am," Reyes said, and his voice broke on it. "Bring him home, please." "I'm gonna try like hell," Emily said. And she ended the line, and she stood there for a moment, and then she turned to her 12 candidates and Jack Sullivan, and there was a fire in her now that hadn't been there before. "Change of plans," she said. "This isn't just a mission anymore. There's a kid on that mountain with a little brother back home who's counting on us. So we don't just do our best out there. We do better than our best." "Everybody clear, clear," 12 voices said. And they went into the mountains. Emily wouldn't let herself describe it even in her own mind, because describing it meant feeling it, and she couldn't afford to feel it yet. The cold, the thin air, the particular quality of silence that she hadn't heard in 3 years and that brought every single memory roaring back the moment they stepped off the transport. This was the place. This was where Danny had asked her if they'd be okay. This was where she'd told him yes. She felt her chest start to close. She felt the old panic rising, the guilt, the ghosts. And then she remembered, it wasn't your fault. Marcus's voice, go bring them home, that's an order. And she took the fear, and she made it a passenger, and she got in the driver's seat, and she led 12 kids up the mountain that had haunted her for 3 years. Sullivan stayed close to her the whole way up. He'd taken the rear position without being asked, the hardest position, the one where you watch everyone's back and carry the weight of anyone who falters. He'd never let the candidates see him struggle, but the altitude was brutal on a 50-year-old body, and Emily saw him laboring, and she said nothing because she knew that letting him do this was the greatest gift she could give him. He needed to earn his way back. She let him. 3 hours up, the first crisis hit. Park, the young woman with the 1,000-yard stare, froze. Not from fear of the enemy, from the terrain, a crossing that dropped away on both sides, and her body simply locked up the way bodies do, and she stood there in the middle of it, unable to go forward, unable to go back. Her breath coming in short, sharp gasps that meant she was seconds from a full panic that could get her killed. The old Jack Sullivan would have shouted at her, "Push through it, soldier." The old Emily 3 years ago might have frozen too. But this Emily moved to her slowly, calmly, and got right in front of her face. "Park, look at me. Just at me. Not down, at me." Park's eyes found hers. There it is. That feeling, the one I told you about. Remember, we felt it in training. You know this feeling. Park's breath hitched. I can't move, ma'am. I can't." "You don't have to move yet," Emily said. "You just have to breathe. That's the only job right now. Breathe with me. In. Good. Out." The feeling's a passenger, Park. Who's driving? "I'm driving," Park whispered. "Say it like you mean it. I'm driving." "Then let's take one step. Just one. Not the whole crossing. Just one step. Can you give me one step?" And Park's shaking took one step. And then another, and Emily walked her across the whole thing one step at a time. And when they reached the other side, Park was crying. But she was across, and she was alive. And every other candidate had just watched their leader talk a frozen soldier through the exact thing that killed people, and they'd watched it work. Sullivan from the rear had watched too. And he thought about his 4 men in the crossing they'd frozen on, and how he'd shouted at them to push through and how they hadn't. And he understood with a grief so sharp it stole his breath that Emily had just done in 60 seconds the thing he'd failed to do. The thing that might have saved 4 lives, and the difference wasn't courage or skill. It was that she taught them the feeling had a name and a driver, and he never had. He didn't have time to sit with it, because that was when the intelligence turned out to be wrong. Command had said the reconnaissance team was pinned at a specific location. They weren't. When Emily's team reached it, it was empty, with signs that the recon team had been forced to move days ago. And now the window was closing, the weather was turning, and 12 half-trained candidates and 2 instructors were on a mountain that took no prisoners with 7 people to find and no idea where they were. "We split up," one of the candidates said, the natural instinct. "No," Emily said instantly. "That's exactly what killed my unit. We got separated and the mountain picked us off one at a time. Nobody splits up. Not for any reason. We stay together and we're slower, but we're alive." She looked at the terrain, and something in her, some deep instinct built from the worst night of her life, started to work. "I know where they'd go. If they had to move and they were smart, there's exactly one place on this mountain that offers cover and a defensible position and a water source. It's where I would have gone. It's where I did go 3 years ago with what was left of my people." Her voice was steady. "Follow me." And she led them, not on the map's route, but on the road of a survivor. The route she'd learned by living through the thing these 7 people were living through now. 2 hours later, as the lights started to fail and the weather closed in, they found them. 5 of the 7 were alive. 2 hadn't made it, and their bodies were wrapped with the terrible care that soldiers give their dead. The 5 living were in bad shape, cold injured out of the supplies, and at the center of them, propped against the rock, barely conscious, was a hard-faced staff sergeant with his little brother's eyes. Miguel Reyes. "You real," he rasped when Emily knelt beside him. Or am I finally losing it? I'm real, Emily said. Your brother sent me. Well, he wanted to come himself. I wouldn't let him. Something broke in the sergeant's ruined face, some mix of relief and grief and disbelief. He's okay, Miguel's okay. He's okay, he's back on base, losing his mind, because I made him stay. And I promised him I'd bring you down this mountain, so that's what we're going to do. Emily gripped his shoulder. Can you walk, Sergeant? I can crawl if it gets me to my brother, Reyes said. Walking will be faster, Emily said, and something almost like a smile crossed his cracked lips. But the celebration lasted about 10 seconds because the weather that had been closing in wasn't closing in anymore. It had arrived, and Emily looked up at a sky that she recognized, a sky she'd seen exactly once before 3 years ago, right before the storm that had turned a survivable situation into a massacre. We have to move, she said, and there was an edge in her voice the candidates hadn't heard. Right now, that storm is the thing that killed my unit. It's not weather, it's a wall. Once it hits, we can't move and we can't be found, and anyone still exposed doesn't come home. We have 5 injured, 2 dead we're bringing with us, and maybe 40 minutes before that wall hits. Move. Everybody move. And that was when the second twist came, the one Emily hadn't seen. The one that changed everything. Because as they started to move, Sullivan came up beside her, and his face was gray and not from the altitude. Emily, he said quietly so the candidates couldn't hear. My chest. She looked at him. What? It's been building all day. I told myself it was the altitude. It's not the altitude. He pressed a hand to his sternum, and she saw the truth in his eyes, the same gray she'd seen in Marcus on that floor. I've had a bad heart for 2 years, Emily. Never told anyone. Would have grounded me. And I think this mountain just called the debt. Emily's mind raced. 50-year-old man, bad heart, brutal altitude, a storm 40 minutes out, 5 injured survivors, 2 dead, 12 candidates. And now her rear guard, her partner, the man she'd need most for the descent, was a heartbeat away from being one more body on this mountain. How bad, she said. Bad enough that I need to tell you something in case I don't make it down, Sullivan said, and he gripped her arm. If it comes to a choice out there, Emily, if it comes down to getting everyone down or stopping for me, you leave me. You hear me. You do the thing I could never do. You keep your head, you make the call, and you don't let a storm take 12 kids because you stopped for one old man who spent his last good years being wrong about you. Nobody gets left, Emily said fiercely. That's the whole point, Jack. That's the entire thing I've been teaching. Nobody walks in there alone. Nobody. That includes you. Even when leaving one saves 12, we're not going to have to make that choice, Emily said. Because I've been on this mountain in that storm, and I know something Command doesn't. I know where the shelter is. There's a place in overhang, real cover, maybe 20 minutes from here. It's where I held the survivors of my unit through the worst of the storm 3 years ago. It's the reason any of us came home at all. She looked at him hard. We're not going to outrun the storm, Jack. We were never going to outrun it. We're going to get everyone, including you, into that shelter before it hits, and we're going to wait it out, and then we're going to walk down this mountain together. All of us. That's the plan. That was always the plan. Sullivan stared at her. You knew. You knew about the storm before we came up. I suspected, Emily said. The seas in the sky. I've been watching it all day. I didn't tell Command because they'd have scrubbed the mission, and those 5 people would be dead. And I didn't tell you because you'd have worried, and I needed you sharp. She started moving, pulling him with her. I know this mountain, Jack. It took everything from me once. I spent 3 years thinking that made it my enemy. But it's not my enemy. It's the only teacher that ever taught me how to survive it. And right now, everything it taught me is going to bring 14 people home. Now walk 20 minutes. You've got 20 minutes in you. I know you do. And Jack Sullivan, heart failing on the mountain that had haunted the woman he'd wronged, walked. Because she told him he could, and he'd learned over 2 impossible weeks to believe her. They made the shelter with minutes to spare. Emily got all 14 of them under the overhang and, the injured and the candidates and the 2 dead and Sullivan gray and struggling. And she got them positioned exactly the way she'd positioned the survivors of her unit 3 years ago, sharing warmth, watching each other. And then the storm hit, and it hit like the wall she'd promised. And the world outside disappeared into white and roar and killing cold. Inside the shelter in the dark, packed together, they waited. And Emily moved from person to person, checking each one, and she came to Sullivan and she sat beside him, and she took his pulse, and it was bad, thready, and irregular, and they both knew. Tell me about your 4 men, she said quietly under the roar of the storm. Now you want to do this now. You've been carrying them for 22 years the same way I carried mine, Emily said. And I found out 2 nights ago that carrying it that way almost killed me. So yes, now, tell me their names. And Jack Sullivan, in the dark, in the storm, with his heart failing, said the names of his 4 men out loud for the first time in 22 years. And he told her about each one. And Emily listened and held his hand, and when he finished, she said the thing Marcus had said to her. They don't need you to join them, Jack, she said. They need you to make it mean something. And you did. Every candidate you ever trained who came home a little safer because of what you learned from losing them. And these 12 and these 5, they're going down this mountain partly because of you. That's not nothing. That's everything. Your 4 men are all over this rescue, Jack. They're the reason you're the kind of instructor who'd climb a mountain with a bad heart to save someone else's kids. Don't you dare die thinking you failed them. You've been honoring them your whole life. You just never knew it. And Jack Sullivan, the toughest man on the base, wept in the dark, and it was the first time he'd cried for his 4 men in 22 years, and it was the thing that had been poisoning him the whole time finally coming out. Stay with me, Commander, Emily said, gripping his hand. The storm breaks in a few hours. Marcus is waiting on the other side. Reyes is waiting for his brother. 12 kids need to watch you walk down this mountain so they know it can be done. So you stay with me. That's an order, and I outrank you in this program. Remember, you picked the wrong captain to disobey. And through his tears, through the pain, Jack Sullivan laughed. A real one. Yes, ma'am, he said. The storm raged for 4 hours. Emily didn't sleep. She moved through the dark all night, from the injured to the candidates to the dying commander, holding it all together with nothing but her voice and her will and the hard-won knowledge of a woman who had done this exact thing before and lost and was not going to lose again. Torres, at one point in the deepest part of the night, crawled over to her. Ma'am, he whispered, can I ask you something? Anything. That night, 3 years ago, when you were here before. He hesitated. Is this what it was like? Is this how it happened? Emily was quiet for a moment. This is exactly how it happened, she said. The storm, the shelter, holding people together in the dark, not knowing who'd make it to morning. She looked at him. The difference is 3 years ago, I didn't know if I was doing it right. I was terrified I was making it worse. I lost people, and I spent 3 years sure it was because I wasn't good enough. She squeezed his shoulder. This time I know I'm doing it right, because a dying old man told me 2 nights ago that I was always good enough, that the losing was never my fault, and that changes everything, Torres. Doing the hardest thing in the world is different when you're not also drowning in the lie that you're not enough to do it. Torres was quiet. Then he said, I'm glad someone told you, ma'am. Me too, kid, Emily said. Me too. And somewhere in the 4th hour, the roar outside began to fade. The storm was breaking. Emily crawled to the edge of the shelter and looked out, and the white wall was thinning, the killing wind dropping, and beyond it, faint but real, the first gray light of a morning she had brought all 14 of them to see. She crawled back to Sullivan. His breathing was shallow, but he was conscious, and when she took his pulse, it was weak, but it was there. Storm's breaking, Commander, she said. Morning's coming. You made it through the night. Told you I would, Sullivan whispered, though they both knew he'd told her no such thing. Now, here's the hard part, Emily said. We've got a descent ahead of us, and you're going to hate every step, and your heart is going to scream at you, and you're going to want to quit and tell me to leave you. She gripped his hand one more time. And you're not going to, because there are 12 kids who need to watch you walk down. Because a rescue where the instructor died teaches them the wrong lesson. And because Marcus Hale is sitting in a hospital bed waiting to hear that Jack Sullivan came down off this mountain alive, so the two of you can argue about who was more wrong about who. She almost smiled. So we walk, slow, together, nobody alone. You ready? And Jack Sullivan looked at the woman he'd called a rumor 3 weeks ago. The woman who'd had every right to bury his career and instead had climbed a mountain to bury nothing at all. The woman who'd taught him at 50 years old how to be human and how to grieve and how to lead. And he gathered the last of his strength and he said the only thing there was to say. "Lead the way, Captain," he said. "I'll follow you anywhere." And as the storm cleared over a mountain that had taken everything from her, once Emily Carter stood up in the gray dawn light, 14 souls behind her, and began the long walk down. The descent took 9 hours, and every one of them was a battle. Emily set the pace to Sullivan's heart, not to the storm's window, and it was the hardest command decision she'd made all mission, because the slower they went, the more exposed they were. But she'd made herself a promise on that mountain, and the promise was nobody alone, nobody left, and she was not going to break it to save time. So they crawled down, 14 souls, the injured supported the 2 dead, carried in turns, and Jack Sullivan putting one foot in front of the other on a heart that wanted to quit with every single step. Twice he went down. Twice she thought that was it. The first time, 3 hours into the descent, his legs simply gave out and he crumpled, and Emily was on him instantly, and his eyes had that faraway look that she recognized from Marcus on the floor, and her own heart stopped. Jack, look at me. Don't you go anywhere." "Leave me," he whispered. "Emily, the kids, leave me and get them down." "I already told you what I think of that idea," Emily said, and she got an arm under him and hauled him back up through sheer stubbornness. "You listen to me, Commander. You spent 22 years teaching soldiers that leaders go first and leaders don't quit. Well, now 12 of your candidates are watching you decide whether that was true or whether it was just something you said. So which is it? Were you lying to them for 22 years, or are you going to get up and prove you meant it?" And Sullivan, who could not have gotten up for his own life, got up for that, because she'd found the one thing that could still move him, which was his own words thrown back at him, made true or false by what he did in the next 10 seconds. "That's dirty, Captain," he rasped, getting his feet under him. "You called me a rumor in front of 200 people, Emily said. "I earned a little dirty." The second time he went down was worse, 6 hours in, and this time he didn't try to talk. This time he just looked at her, and there was an apology in his eyes, a goodbye, and Emily saw it and refused it. She dropped to her knees and she did the thing she'd been trained to do and prayed she wouldn't have to. And she worked on him right there on the mountainside while 12 candidates formed a circle around them against the wind. And for 90 terrible seconds, Jack Sullivan's heart was the only thing in the entire world that mattered. And then he coughed and breathed, and his eyes came back. "Still here," Emily said, and her voice cracked for the first time all mission. "You're still here, you stubborn old man. Now we finish this. 6 hours down, 3 to go. You are going to walk off this mountain, Jack Sullivan, because I did not climb back into my own personal hell to watch you die in it." And Torres, standing in that circle, said something that none of them ever forgot. "We got you, Commander," the kid said. "Nobody alone, right? That's the rule. You taught us the rule was the rule, so we've got you." And Jack Sullivan looked up at 12 young faces who 2 weeks ago he'd have called soft for caring this much, and he understood finally and completely what Emily had built, what he'd almost destroyed, what Marcus had crossed a country to protect. He got up one more time, and this time the candidates didn't let him walk alone. They took turns, shoulder under his arm, one after another, all 12 of them, passing him between them like he was the most precious cargo on the mountain, which in that moment he was. They came off the mountain as the sun was going down. The transport was waiting, and the medics were waiting, and command was waiting, and there was a moment when the 14 of them came into view, dirty and broken, and carrying their dead and holding up their dying, that nobody on the ground said a word because you could count, and the count was right. Everyone who'd been alive at the Tate was alive at the bottom. 5 survivors rescued, 12 candidates whole, 2 instructors down but breathing. Only the 2 who died before Emily ever reached them were gone, and there had never been a version of the world where she could have saved those. Emily walked at the front, and she did not stop until every single person was loaded onto that transport and the medics had their hands on Sullivan. And only then, only when the last soul was accounted for, did she allow herself to feel her own legs shaking. They flew Sullivan straight to the same hospital as Marcus. And that was the part Emily hadn't let herself think about, the part that had been sitting in the back of her mind the whole descent. Because when they wheeled Jack Sullivan into that cardiac unit, the man in the next recovery room, weak and hooked to a dozen machines, but very much alive, was Marcus Hale. Emily walked into that hospital 48 hours later, cleaned up, hollowed out, having slept for the first time in 3 days, and she stood in the doorway between the 2 rooms, And she looked at the two men who had shaped her entire life, and she almost couldn't hold herself upright. Marcus saw her first. "There she is," he said, his voice thin but his eyes sharp as ever. "The kid who brought 14 people off a mountain that beat everyone else who ever tried it." "You heard," Emily said. "Of course I heard. I've been lying in this bed making nurses tell me everything." His eyes found hers, and there was something in them, pride so deep it was almost painful to look at. "You did it, Emily. You went back into the place that broke you, and you didn't just survive it. You beat it. You turned the worst night of your life into the reason 14 people are alive." His voice roughened. "Do you understand what you did? You didn't just save them, you saved yourself. 3 years I watched you drown, and you walked into the deepest water there is, and you came out the other side." Emily crossed the room and took his hand, and for a moment she couldn't speak. "You gave me back myself," she said finally. "That's what you said you came to do. And then you gave me the truth about that night. And I carried both of those things up that mountain, and they're the reason I made it." She pressed his hand. "You didn't just save me once, Marcus. You saved me twice. And then you saved 14 more people through me. That's the last mission you'll ever run, and you ran it from a hospital bed with a broken heart, and it's the best one you ever did." Marcus smiled, and there were tears in the old warrior's eyes. "That's the nicest thing anyone's said to me in 40 years, and I've decided to believe every word of it." From the next room, a rough voice called out, "If you two are done being sentimental, some of us are trying to recover from cardiac events over here." Emily laughed wet and sudden, and she went to the doorway. Jack Sullivan was propped up in the next bed, gray and diminished but alive and very much himself. "You're supposed to be resting, Commander," she said. "I've been resting for 2 days. I'm bored out of my mind." He looked past her at Marcus. "That him, the famous Marcus Hale?" "Jack Sullivan," Marcus said from the other room, and there was something wry in it. "I heard you called my girl a rumor." "I did," Sullivan said, and he didn't flinch from it, and Emily respected him for that. "Worst call I ever made. And I've made some bad ones." "And then you climbed a mountain with a bad heart to save someone else's kids," Marcus said. "So I hear." "She made me," Sullivan said, nodding at Emily. "Wouldn't let me stay behind. Wouldn't let me die when I tried to. Kept throwing my own words back at me until I had no choice but to be a better man than I've been for 22 years. He was quiet for a moment. "She fixed something in me up there that I didn't think could be fixed. I've been carrying 4 dead men for a long time. She made me put them down. She's good at that," Marcus said softly. "She learned it from watching me carry 6 the wrong way for far too long." And the 2 old warriors in their 2 beds looked at each other across the space between the rooms. 2 men who'd spent their lives leading people into danger and losing some of them and carrying the weight. And something passed between them, a recognition, a kind of peace. And Emily stood in the doorway between them and understood that she was watching 2 chapters of the same story finally meet. The reunion with Reyes happened downstairs, and it was the one that broke everyone. Specialist Reyes had been at the hospital for 2 days refusing to leave waiting. And when they brought his brother down from the mountain alive, battered but alive, the young specialist, who'd come to Emily's dark room 3 weeks earlier to say a test wasn't fair, ran to his brother and held onto him like the world was ending and beginning at the same time. And then he found Emily. He didn't say anything at first, he just looked at her. And then he said, "You promised me you'd try like hell." "I did," Emily said. "You did more than try," Reyes said, and his voice broke completely. "You brought him home. You brought my brother home. Ma'am, there's no words for." He gave up on words. He just stood there, a young man undone by gratitude, and Emily pulled him into a hug and held him while he fell apart. "You know what let me bring him home?" she said quietly over his shoulder. "You did. You trusted somebody else to carry it when everything in you screamed to do it yourself. That's the hardest thing there is, Reyes. And you did it. You stayed. And because you stayed and trusted me, you get to hold your brother right now instead of both of you being on that mountain. Remember that. The bravest thing you did in this whole story was the thing where you didn't get to do anything." And Reyes nodded against her shoulder, and Emily thought about how far this kid had come from the boy who'd been angry on her behalf, and she thought this. This is why. This is what it was all for. The story of what happened on that mountain spread through the military, but not the way legends usually spread. Command wanted it to be a story about an impossible rescue, a heroic feat of skill and endurance. And it was that, but Emily refused quietly and firmly to let it be told that way. Because the lesson of the mountain wasn't that she'd done something impossible. The lesson was the opposite. I didn't do anything superhuman up there, she told the board that reviewed the operation, a board that included some of the same people who'd sent her unit to die 3 years earlier and let her carry the guilt for it. I want that on the record. I didn't make an impossible shot. I didn't do anything that any well-trained soldier couldn't do. What I did was keep my head when it fell apart and teach 12 kids to keep theirs and refuse to leave anyone behind. She looked around the room and her gaze lingered on the ones who'd buried the truth about her unit. The reason my team came home and my unit didn't 3 years ago isn't that I got better. It's that this time I knew the losing wasn't my fault. It's a lot easier to keep your head when you're not also drowning in a lie somebody told you to keep themselves comfortable. The room went very quiet at that, because everyone in it knew exactly what she was saying and exactly who she was saying it to. Captain, one of the board members said carefully, "Are you making an accusation?" "I'm making a request," Emily said. "The truth about my unit, the real intelligence, the real orders. I want it declassified for the families. 11 people died up there, and their families have spent 3 years thinking their sons and daughters died because of some failure, maybe mine, maybe theirs. They deserve to know the truth, that their people were sent into something no one could survive, and that they died as heroes doing the impossible, not as casualties of somebody's mistake." Her voice was steel. "I carried that lie for 3 years because I didn't know better. The families are still carrying it, and I will not stop asking until they are free of it. That's my request. And with respect given what I just did on that mountain, I think I've earned the right to have it heard." It took 6 months, but she got it. The truth about her unit was declassified for the families, and Emily flew to each of them, all 11, and sat in their living rooms and told them the truth about how their people died. Not as failures, as heroes sent into an impossible place who fought like hell and saved the ones who could be saved. She sat with Danny's mother last, the corporal who'd asked if they'd be okay. Emily had put it off and off because it was the hardest one, and finally there was nowhere left to hide from it, and she sat in Danny's mother's kitchen and told her the truth. "He asked me if we were going to be okay," Emily said, "right before it went wrong, and I told him yes, and I've spent 3 years thinking I lied to him." She had to stop for a moment. "But I've come to understand something, and I need you to hear it. When Danny asked me that, he wasn't really asking if we'd all survive. He was asking if he was somewhere that people would take care of each other, if he mattered to the people around him. And the answer to that was yes. It was always yes. Your son died surrounded by people who loved him, doing something that saved lives, and he was never not for 1 second alone." Her voice broke. "That's the promise I actually made him. Not that we'd all live, that he wouldn't be alone, and I kept it. He wasn't alone. I was right there. I stayed with him. He knew he mattered all the way to the end." And Danny's mother, who had carried her own 3-year weight, wept. And then she took Emily's hands and she said the thing that finally, after everything, let Emily set the last of it down. "Thank you for staying with my boy," she said. "Thank you for being the one who didn't leave him alone." And Emily Carter, 3 years and one mountain later, finally forgave herself. A year after the mountain Fort Redstone was a different place. Emily's program had become the standard, not just at Redstone, across the whole military. The idea that you don't train soldiers to feel unstoppable, you train them to know who they are when they break. The idea that fear is a passenger and not a driver. The idea that nobody walks into hell alone. All of it spread because it worked. Because the proof was 14 people who'd walked off a mountain that should have killed them all. Jack Sullivan recovered. His heart never fully came back and he couldn't do the field work anymore. But he became the best classroom instructor the program had precisely because he'd learned at 50 years old and on a dying heart the thing he'd spent his whole career not understanding. He taught the candidates to fail. He taught them that not knowing the answer wasn't the same as failing. And he told them every single class the story of the 4 men he'd lost by teaching them wrong and the 12 he'd helped save by finally teaching them right. "I called your program director a rumor once. He'd tell each new class, in front of 200 people. I kicked her rifle across the dirt and told her she'd inherited a legend she didn't earn. He'd let it sit. I have never been more wrong about anything in my life. And I tell you that first thing every class because the most important thing I can teach you is that being certain is not the same as being right. I was certain. I was also a fool. Don't be the man I was. Be the kind of person who can be wrong and admit it and become better. That's the whole job. That's the whole life. Marcus Hale lived another 2 years. He never fully recovered from the heart, but he had 2 more years and he spent them near the base watching Emily's program grow. And Emily visited him every week and they'd sit together, the old teacher and the student who'd surpassed him, and they'd talk about everything and nothing. Near the end, he said to her, "You know what the funny thing is? I came out of retirement to give you back to yourself. I thought that was the mission. Save the one soldier I couldn't stop thinking about." He smiled thin and tired and completely at peace. "And instead you took what I gave you and you saved 14 on a mountain, and then you built a program that saved I don't even know how many since, and it'll keep saving them long after I'm gone and long after you're gone. One old man, one broken kid, and it turned into that." He squeezed her hand. "That's the thing nobody tells you about doing right by one person, Emily. You never know how far it goes. It just keeps going." "You were the one person somebody did right by once," Emily said. "The man who came to you when you were carrying six the wrong way." "I was," Marcus said. "And now there's a whole chain of it. Him to me to you to those 12. Those 12 to whoever they save and teach and pull it out of the dark." His eyes were wet and shining. "That's what a life is, kid. Not the medals, not the impossible shots. It's the chain. It's making sure the thing that saved you gets passed down so it can save somebody else." He looked at her. "You're the strongest link I ever forged. Don't you ever forget that." He died that winter peacefully in his sleep with Emily holding his hand. And at his funeral, which was small, because that's how he'd wanted it, Emily stood up and did not talk about his classified record or his legendary status. She talked about a man who'd crossed a country on a failing heart to save one drowning soldier, and about the chain he'd started 40 years earlier when someone did right by him, and about how that chain now ran through her and through 12 candidates and through 5 rescued soldiers and through 11 families who finally knew the truth and outward endlessly into people Marcus Hale had never met, and never would, all of them a little safer because one old man had refused to let one broken person drown. Specialist Reyes was there. He was a sergeant now in Emily's program teaching. His brother had recovered and gotten out and was home alive with a family. Torres was there, an instructor too. Park was there, the young woman who'd frozen on the crossing and been walked across one step at a time, now teaching other frozen soldiers how to find the driver's seat. Jack Sullivan was there, gray and slow, but standing, having outlived the doctor's predictions by pure stubbornness. All of them, the whole chain, standing in the cold to say goodbye to the man who'd made them possible. Emily finished her eulogy with the thing Marcus had taught her, the thing she'd carried up a mountain, the thing she'd say to every class for the rest of her life. "Somebody's going to ask you someday if they're going to be okay," she said to the mourners, to the soldiers, to everyone. "A scared kid in a bad place is going to look at you and ask that question, and you're going to want to lie and say yes. Don't. Tell them the truth. Tell them you don't know if everyone makes it. But tell them this and mean it. Tell them they will not be alone. Tell them somebody will stay. Because that's the only promise that matters, and it's the only one you can actually keep, and it's the promise Marcus Hale kept for me when I was drowning. And it's the promise I kept on that mountain, and it's the promise every one of you is going to keep for somebody someday." Her voice rang out clear and strong over the cold ground. "Nobody walks into the dark alone. That was his life. That's our job. And that is how a rumor became a legend, and a legend became a teacher, and a teacher saved us all." The story of the One Bullet Challenge still gets told at Fort Redstone, but the soldiers who tell it right, the ones who understand it, know it was never about the shot. The shot was just the first day. The real story is what came after the mountain, the storm, the 14 who came home, the truth that set 11 families free, the chain that started with one old man and one broken soldier and never stopped growing. Emily Carter led that program for the rest of her career, and she never once called herself a legend because she knew the truth that Jack Sullivan learned on a mountainside and Marcus Hale spent 40 years living. The measure of a person was never the impossible thing they could do. It was whether they stayed. It was whether they passed it on. It was whether when a scared kid asked if they'd be okay, They were the kind of person who wouldn't leave. Emily Carter was that person. She was always that person. And the rumor that Jack Sullivan tried to destroy on a shooting range turned out to be the truest thing anyone at Fort Redstone had ever doubted. She was exactly who they said she was, and she spent the rest of her life proving that the people the world is quickest to doubt are so often the ones holding everyone else together in the dark.